welcome everybody to Office Hours. This is Jamie Bobyk, and I have a special guest with me today, all the way from Canada, the east side of Canada anyways. So we have Naomi Szeben, and she's the editor for Baker's Journal, and we got Colleen Cross, and she's the editor for Canadian Pizza. So if you could, spend a few minutes just talking about yourself, what you do, and what you bring to the table. And Naomi.
Oh, okay. So I wasn't sure. I didn't want to
Yeah.
step over Colleen. Well, I'm the editor for Baker's Journal. That's Canada's oldest family-run baking trade industry magazine. And I've been editing for about 3 years now. And Colleen was a tremendous help in the industry, just showing me the ropes and introducing me to Annex. She's a wonderful colleague and a good friend as well. So I feel very lucky on both a professional and personal side.
All right. Well, thank you, Naomi. That's really sweet. I feel the same way and love working with you. We work closely back and forth. I'm the editor of Canadian Pizza Magazine for the last, going on 7 years. And we are a magazine that's for the fresh pizza industry in Canada, but really focused, with a special focus on the independent operator. So we go to in the neighborhood of 6,000 pizzerias across Canada, and that can be anyone from the smaller mom and pop pizzeria to a concept that has pizza as their focus, or a smaller medium size regional chain, right up to the larger chains. So we just focus on bringing them information and things of interest, kind of a half of a foodie magazine and a business magazine, I guess, probably a little bit like Baker's Journal.
Thank you. This is really a privilege having you both on here, because I think we're going to get some really good insight, and especially in Canada, where a lot of the conversation sometimes doesn't happen. So in these questions, unless I guess I say your name, we can just start with Naomi providing the answer first. So we'll start with the first one. So over the past year, in your opinions, how have bakery and food manufacturers been coping with all the new regulations put in place, such as physical distancing and strict, they've always had strict sanitation, but it's even stricter now, sanitation guidelines?
Well, at first, and when I say at first, I'm referring to March to say April of 2020. It started out with a lockdown, and at first no one was certain what an essential service was. So to be fair, bakeries were still seen as an essential service because they're providing food, whereas a restaurant, still technically in the food industry, would not, they really struggled. However, bakeries were doing very well. And one of the things that we had heard, through both larger industrial bakeries as well as small mom and pop bakeries, were that the ones that were more agile had survived. The ones that were able to put in curbside practices for pickup to maintain social distance, or the larger factories that had put up barriers in between work zones to ensure that there wouldn't be as much fine articulation of breathing, or having masks in place immediately. So they were the ones that managed to survive quite well. For the mom and pop, that might be a different story. For instance, many bakery delis or bakery cafes had to close down an area of their shops. That's much the same I hear in the US. In other words, they couldn't have seated customers, but they really tried to reach out using either social media or ensuring that whatever in-shop transactions could take place, say taking an order or picking up an order, that they had to limit the amount of people in the shop, putting up signage saying, depending on the square footage, X amount of people were allowed in at a time, trying to make sure that there was either delivery or curbside pickup or some form of connecting with their clients.
Well, hopefully you can add to that, Colleen. That's a lot of really good information.
It is, and I really can only echo that a little bit in terms of the restaurants that I've talked to, and that it could be the more for the independent restaurants. It was not so much having the sanitation measures. that's all something that pizzerias, restaurants, bakeries are used to. It was more of the overall uncertainty and the changing from day to day, trying to figure out what you need to be doing, and also communicating that with their staff, trying to find new ways to do that, maybe through apps, to keep in touch with everyone and keep everyone updated. But yeah, I'd say, just like Naomi has pointed out, that operators got pretty creative with signage and taping, figuring out the flow through their restaurants, whether they could remove the tables altogether or tape them off. I've even heard of some examples of people getting creative with putting mannequins in the seats. That's a more recent thing I heard. And even, I'll just make the point that a lot of them, and especially maybe through April and into May of last year, 2020, were trying to make good use of their downtime. So if they did renos and or the deep cleaning that they would usually do every spring, that was a chance to do that. But yeah, I think it was just responding by the minute to all the changes that were happening.
So now, being in the automation business we are in, we keep hearing more and more and more from throughout the world there that there's a real big labor shortage. There always was a labor shortage, but it's heightened a lot more now since the pandemic started happening. So seeing that hiring more staff to replace any of the shortages it's even more challenging now. What do you hear or see that a solution or part of the solution for keeping production in these plants running at optimum capacity? Are you hearing anything from some of the manufacturers out there?
If I could jump in, I have heard a little bit, for instance, depending on the space of the bakery floor or the ethos of a bakery and their budget, some do turn to the use of machinery. For instance, with the advantage of, say, having a device that would do the piping or do any repeated dump and lifting, that would reduce a lot of humans, and the risk of contamination in the space. It has the advantage, of course, of not worrying about not just contamination, but worrying about issues like social distancing as well. And schedules can be made. A machine might not call in sick at the last moment. A machine can, assuming it's working correctly, could work longer hours and longer stretches. And a lot of them had considered using more machinery if their budget allows for it, considering part of the issue that they are worried about, aside from space in their bakery floor, their factory floor, was really, once the pandemic lifts, what's left in our budget for us.
What do you hear, Colleen?
Yeah, well, it's sort of a different audience that I'll speak to, but I would say that cost is the biggest, obviously the biggest obstacle in automating. For the smaller pizzerias, I would say it's not so much, I can just back up and say that before the pandemic started, staffing was by far the #1 issue, and that was talked about. And then there was a bit of a, refocusing. And then now again, as you've pointed out, it's a huge issue again. I don't see too many operators of the smaller persuasion looking to get into automation necessarily, just because of the costs that could be involved or that are perceived to be involved. And just, I think the things I've seen are more pizzerias interested in that maybe didn't look at conveyor ovens, for example, and may have just had a wood fired or something. They're looking at different types of ovens. That is sort of a very time efficient type of an oven, as an example. And they're seeing that they can make really great products using those and other types of automation. I guess it would be on a smaller scale, nothing to the level of, say, Zoom Pizza was doing in California, over the last few years, which has been really interesting to watch, the pizza robotics. I've seen a few products come on the market in the nature of like dough stretchers, and that's always been something that some pizzerias, especially if they're going to scale up, would look at using. I've seen it's like an automated stretcher. I've seen different models of that. And I would just say that some of the pizzerias who are looking to have 2 and 3 locations, or maybe have a couple, they have looked at centralizing and having a central commissary or ghost kitchen, if you will, however you want to put it, or just having one of their stores be the central commissary. So that's, I guess it would be, what's the level of where you see a return on investment in some of this equipment that would be needed, and that you might at that level.
So we're going to stick with you, Colleen. We're talking about pizza automation, and you pointed out some of the robotics that's happening, and there's some really interesting ideas out there. Ghost kitchens, of course, right into fast food restaurants as well, where robotics are kind of operating in the back end. So with pizza, the numbers that I see and what I hear is it just keeps growing. And, I know of one pizza manufacturer in Quebec that just couldn't keep up. No matter they're kept up and adding automation, and the demand was so high during this time. Do you see that there's like an urgency for pizza manufacturers to incorporate more automation, after this going forward, or even now?
Well, it can really only speak to the restaurants, as we don't deal in sort of the frozen pizza, end of things, and the larger processing. But it's very true that a certain number and level of pizzerias are in some ways busier than ever. The ones for whom delivery was always part of their way of operating, the delivery and takeout and curbside. And of course, as I'm sure you've seen in the States as well, that the sit-down restaurants they've had more of a struggle, where that was part of their proposition, to have people come in and enjoy a meal away from home. So I think some of the pizzerias that have seen how well they're doing and have done well, and we did a survey back in January and found that there were quite a number of people opening a pizzeria during the pandemic as well. So clearly they're seeing that there's demand. So I don't know whether I can answer that I've seen whether there's urgency, but I've certainly seen there's interest in with a very scaled down way of operating and just focusing on off premise, that might be time to grow.
Okay. And Naomi, we're going to switch to Naomi now. So we're going to talk about in-store bakeries. And again, numbers I'm seeing and what I'm hearing is there's been a decline in certain categories in in-store bakeries, specifically, the bins that you would open and the fresh products where you would grab it and put it in a bag. And, for the longest time, that was never an issue. Seems to be maybe an issue now with sanitary concerns. Have they changed their focus to offer more packaged products rather than fresh, single or bulk items from the bins? Do you see that happening in the in-store bakery?
There's definitely been a shift towards packaged goods. For instance, it's not that people don't want to, say, choose their own cookies or arrangement of rolls, but due to certain constraints for not just hygiene and making sure that everyone in the bakery backroom is safe, a lot of what both in-store and I'd say factory, as well as some smaller bakeries are doing, is offering prepackaged selection. So you would, instead of say, grab a bag and say put 6 buns, or grab a box and you grab a dozen cookies, you would have a situation where you would go into the shop or go online and order a pre-selected I would like a dozen chocolate chip cookies. I would like 6 buns. And they'd either be, packaged in a clamshell for smaller items or anything that still wants to be seen, because ultimately you package for a visual effect. People eat with their eyes. You want to see what you're getting, whether it's, normally just a slice of cake or something, or a bag of sweet bread. You want to see it. So there has been reach for more clamshell boxes, bags, anything that can be packaged safely without human interaction and then sold.
So have you heard, we're going to touch on commissaries. Have you heard about commissaries becoming bigger, central commissaries, and, maybe incorporating more automation there? Or do you hear anything about central commissaries? Have they been affected?
To some degree they had, and not really, because unfortunately with bakeries they're still, or fortunately I should say, bakeries are still very active. So, but there has been a move towards more automation. Ultimately it comes down to an issue of staffing. People would like to have somebody or something that can package quickly, reliably, and without much human interference. In other words, no human hands, worries about, say, breathing on it. I think a lot of shops are concerned if you see a clerk that doesn't have their mask on or has it somewhere around their chin, people are a little uneasy. But if you see, that there's a machine that's ultimately packaging it, you're fine. There's a certain element of comfort for the customer to know that neither their goods nor the way it has been packaged has been tampered with.
Okay. It's funny you touched on the mask there, where maybe before it wasn't really a big thing. You'd see people walking around and doing what they're doing, but now we're very conscious of that. So, as far as automation, specifically robotics, it seems to be a love-hate topic with a lot of different people, and I get into many discussions with people that they're removing jobs, they're taking away jobs, and I try to explain that it's not the intent. The intent is to remove the non-value-added tasks, such as loading, unloading bakery trays and whatnot. And the reality is the industry is experiencing, like we touched on, incredible labor shortages. The baby boomers are retiring, getting older. New generations are just not interested in doing this work. What's your quick take on this? And we'll start with Naomi.
I think you put it down very well. I think bakers in general are very protective of the craft. And I think there's a lot of concern of people thinking the robots are here for our jobs, when you think of the tactile element of baking. People want to be ensured that there's a certain amount of artisanal quality, that there's a human element behind the design, the shaping, the baking. But as you mentioned it, a lot of baking is just labor, not necessarily a craft or a well thought out or something that requires years of training like a master baker. As you mentioned, it's things like pick up that 10-kilo bag of flour, dump it into the bin, unload 20 trays of cookies at once without spilling or dropping anything. So yeah, there's definitely room for, say, some, I would say repetitive tasks, something that an added advantage would be saying we're removing the element of repetitive stress on joints or knees or backs.
Colleen.
Yeah, yes. I would say, keeping in mind that I'm talking about a smaller scale of operation in general here, and not the processing. I think there is room for automation. As I echo what Naomi says completely, that there is, you want to keep that idea of the craft of pizza alive and well, and that something special that only they do. But you're right, it can be very hard physically, and I would also say there's a lot of skill sets that not just young people, but people who work at restaurants and pizzerias gain from the job. So the jobs that, the tasks that are part of the job that teach them organization and communications and other skills like that would be the ones you'd want to keep human beings in. And I've heard, thinking of Zoom Pizza, what they were doing with the robots a few years back, right up to the recent past. They looked at moving their staff into more customer service and sales roles and putting more training into upselling and just kind of refocusing. That was always the proposition they made, as you've said, Jamie, that the idea wasn't to replace them, but to do those jobs that are not necessarily being filled or being sought after. So I think it really comes down to cost and whether it's affordable for them. But I think when you look at just technology and sort of online marketing and online ordering, I should say, and the different apps that pizzerias have, they've been quick to take those on when they're affordable at a smaller scale. So, but I think you will see, we've seen lots of different creative forays into frozen pizza, for example, from fresh, from an example that comes to mind immediately would be General Assembly Pizza in Toronto, that had a few restaurants, and they kind of shifted gears quickly during the pandemic and started putting out their meal kits, their pizza kits, and went to frozen, which they now have in some of the grocery stores. So as well as their pizza subscription service. So I think of some of those that are quite looking to grow, and how they'll be looking at getting creative and how they can make the most of the staff they have.
Thank you for being on here on this, taking the time and giving us some information, what's happening in Canada, what you see in the industry, and for anybody that's watching, Naomi and Colleen, Naomi, can you just let people know how to get in contact with you? They need to talk to you about anything?
Sure. They can reach me at editor@bakersjournal.com. So that's BAKERSJOURNAL.com.
Perfect. And Colleen?
Great. Yes. They can reach us at our website. It's a little bit easier than the email. CanadianPizzaMag.com. And my address is CROFS, that's C Cross, at annexbusinessmedia.com. Happy to hear from anyone.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So make sure you guys have any questions. Anybody have any questions, reach out to them. This has been fantastic. It's been a privilege for us to have you on, and have yourself a great weekend.
Well, thank you.
Okay, you take care.
Thank you.
Okay,
great
bye-bye.
to be here. Bye.